To say Galaxy Quest was a sleeper hit is not an exaggeration. Made to be an affectionate parody of Star Trek, the film that DreamWorks had no belief in has gained the status of cult classic by its own right. The fans have demanded a sequel of the film right from the beginning, but it's been 27 years since the film's release, and we are yet to see a sequel. Though Tim Allen, the Shatner-esque lead actor of the film, mentioned there was a script in 2014, nothing came of it. As of now, there isn't any sign of the film, but there have been major talks regarding a TV series. Cast member Sam Rockwell had mentioned in an interview that an unexpected death of Alan Rickman in 2016 and Tim Allen's loaded television schedule has complicated things. The project has bounced around since 2015 and almost found a home in Amazon Studios, but it wasn't until 2023 that Paramount announced a Galaxy Quest series that was in early production for its Paramount Plus streaming service, and that Simon Pegg and Georgia Pritchett were attached. That was 2 years ago, and since then, The Orville, which is along the same lines as Galaxy Quest, has completed 3 seasons. So I don't think a new Galaxy Quest would attract that many viewers. Star Trek is also planning a workplace comedy set within their universe. With all that, I don't think we can expect a series anytime now. While visual media is in limbo, there's not one but 2 comic book sequels that have flown relatively under the radar. Lucky for you, I'm going to explore them both. Now, let's get started. Old Troubles and the Fate of the Universe. If you haven't had the pleasure of watching Galaxy Quest yet, you should pause this video, go watch that movie, and come back. I promise I'll wait. But if you have forgotten what the movie is about because it's been a while since you saw it, let me sum it up real quickly. Galaxy Quest is about the cast of the titular show where Commander Pete Quincy Taggart and his crew travel around the universe on the NSEA Protector, solving intergalactic issues. The show had ended a decade ago, and the stars didn't have much claim to fame except that, and sustain themselves by attending fan conventions. The cast consists of Jason Nesmith, the vain main lead who thrives on attention, Sir Alexander Dane, who is a trained theater actor and wasn't getting much work these days and was upset by it, Gwen DeMarco, who's disappointed about playing the token female, Fred Kwan, the calmest person in the group, Tommy Weber, a former child star, and Guy, who had played the role of an extra who got killed within minutes. Things take an interesting turn when the Thermians, a race of aliens, mistake the show for a documentary and ask the cast to help them in negotiating with the cruel invader Ceres. The group uses their knowledge from the show to commandeer a ship built exactly as shown in the show and kill Ceres with a little bit of help from Brandon, a high school kid who was an avid fan of Galaxy Quest. I hope that jogged your memory. Released in 2008, the first sequel of the show is Galaxy Quest: Global Warning, written by Scott Lobdell and illustrated by Ilias Kyriazis. We begin on a real serious mission as the NSEA Protector, which ends up on a cliffhanger as Commander Taggart risks himself in a massive explosion for the mission and the safety of his crew. We don't know whether he survives the explosion, though, as that cliffhanger marks the end of the 2-hour-long pilot of the show Galaxy Quest. Journey continues. The first screening amidst the cast and crew is met with applause, and Sandy, the producer, invites them all for an after-screening party at a fancy place called Plate. Sandy insists that his new girlfriend Gwen join them. Gwen tries to avoid going as Jason, with whom she had shared a steamy kiss after the Ceres affair, was with his new fling, but decided to humor Sandy. At the party, Jason's new girlfriend doesn't last long as he mistakenly calls her Catherine, while her name is Camille. He doesn't care, though, as he quickly moves on to the next beautiful woman his eyes fall on. Sir Alexander Dane gets news from his law firm he hired that he would be let out of his contract by the network upon his request, and that his character, Dr. Lazarus, would be killed off. As Dane ponders over the terms, Gwen drowns her jealousy in champagne and doesn't let on that she misses Jason to Sandy. Jason, despite being with a girl whose mother had enjoyed the original show, has his eyes on Gwen. Tommy cancels an appearance because he wanted to be paid more than $100 a signature, and Guy mulls over his spin-off show, Rock Academy, that hasn't moved past the talking stage. Fred and La Larari, his Thermian beau, have have been going strong. Both want a child and disappointed that their biology is not compatible. Everyone's having their own issues, but the party must go on, and Jason picks up a glass to propose a toast, speaking about the adventure he's had and how it is a message from the universe for him to focus on bigger things. Suddenly, an executive bursts in, panting and puffing, and he lets them know that in the exact slot of the 2-hour pilot, a very famous show was airing their special episode with digitally inserted superstars of rock and roll, and that kills the mood instantly, and everyone's disappointed. A few days later, Jason comes home arguing with his agent about the lack of work when he finds all his friends in his house. He thinks it's an intervention and tells them that he hasn't had a drink till breakfast, but his friends are there to discuss another pressing matter: the presence of a huge spaceship. Tommy tells him that there have been numerous natural disasters since the ship's drop into Earth's orbit. Lalaurie knows about the ship, as it is called the in local Thermian, or Judgment Ship in English. Though not much is known about them, they had always left a dead planet in their wake. Jason doesn't take it too seriously and asks them to calm down, which triggers Dane to call him an idiot. The two begin bickering when suddenly a chopper stops by Jason's house, and Colonel Stetson, a man Jason was familiar with, asks them all to come with him as the fate of the world rests upon them.
The commander of the Protector and his command crew have escaped custody.
A brief flashback, and the future ahead. When our group of misfit actors and Alien had crashed into the convention and successfully killed Saris, the Army had arrested them all and ushered them to Area 51. They were questioned for several days, examined, quarantined, poked, and prodded. The Army also confiscated their ship and forced the actors to sign an official statement that the spaceship was just a publicity stunt. The cast, however, had benefited from the stunt and had received invites to numerous interviews and talk shows. For a few weeks, they had been the hotcakes everyone wanted a bite out of. People who had previously ignored Jason's calls began returning them, and one of the major ones was Sandy Cashew, the head of a studio. He had proposed a 2-hour backdoor pilot, and before they knew it, the cast was at the table reads. On the sets were where the problems we saw at the screening after party began to materialize. Lalaurie proposed having a child together. Jason hit on extras while Sandy made his move on Gwen. Dane had noticed that Jason did not have his head in the game and asked him what was up. Jason confided in him that he was worried about the ship. Those worries now are about to come to an end. In the Army base where they were taken to, Jason demands to be released, to which the Colonel simply replies that they were all free to go. But if they do, they would miss out on the most exciting part. The Colonel welcomed them to ground protocol, which excited the group as it was the real deal of something they were pretending to be. They agreed to give the group back the NSEA Protector. Jason's suspicions, as the previous time he had asked for the ship, the Colonel had threatened life imprisonment. The Colonel explains that the ship had ejected anybody and everybody who had climbed aboard it to study the technology because of its fail-safe mechanisms. Coming to the present, there's a pretty big ship that threatened to nuke Earth merely with its gravitational pull that was only discovered 3 days ago. Guy gets into a frenzy hearing this and asks why they didn't have weapons that could destroy the ship. The Colonel explains that even if they did, the debris of the ship alone could kill millions. Jason suggests waiting it out, but the Colonel tells him that Earth would blow up in 2 hours if they didn't do anything. The silence of his fellow actors gets to Dane, and he asks them to get it together, as they had been enlisted to go to space. With great reluctance, the Colonel adds that they were humanity's last hope. Meanwhile, the Thermians had begun construction of the new Thermi, making sure to use only as much raw materials as necessary. Meanwhile, working, Commander Mathesar receives a comcast from Lalaurie, who informs him about the Judgment Ship. Though Mathesar initially thinks it's an act, he confronts her once he realizes it's the truth and asks her to continue believing in the heroes she walks with. Once the Colonel informs them that they're out of Earth's gravitational pull, Jason asks Tommy to get the ship as close as he could to the Judgment Ship. Moments later, Jason invites Gwen out onto the deck to gaze gaze at the beauty of the stars. He tells her that looking at space makes him believe in anything is possible and grasps her hand, but Gwen pulls it away, saying not everything could not be possible. He pulls her towards him and tries to kiss her, but she pulls away, telling him that their time had passed. Dane announces that they had arrived, but very soon a tractor beam hits them, and they are taken to the Judgment Ship. A tall woman on the ship tells them that the leaders of this ship only stood by as planets obliterated in their wake. A very bizarre thing happens right after. Though they were aboard the Judgment Ship, a change happens. Jason finds himself being ignored on the streets of Hollywood. Dane finds himself performing theater again, but this time with prosthetics of Dr. Lazarus, and Fred is terrified to see Lalaurie on a rampage. Jason figures out that they were trapped in their worst fears and breaks out. He then enters Dane's nightmare and tells him that his biggest fear was being pigeonholed into Dr. Lazarus and losing his personality. He interrupts his performance and tears away his prosthetics, announcing to the audience that he's more than his rubber headpiece. He challenges Dane to leave the psychic prison that he was trapped in, and Dane agrees. Suddenly, he awakens in a darkened room to the Judgment Ship. Jason points out their sleeping comrades, and they decide to help them break free as well. Gwen's biggest fear was giving way too many chances to Jason. So once he meets her in the dream, he tells her that though she might not be able to trust him anymore, she can continue to love him. He tells her that Sandy is a good man and that he was honored to be Gwen's friend. Fred and Lalaurie share the same fear. Since they want a child, their fear is that Lalaurie's pregnancy hormones would cause her to wreak havoc in humanity. Dane also clocked Fred's fear, which was that he was not sure that he could make the ultimate sacrifice for the love of his life. Dane points a gun at Lalaurie, and Fred jumps to take the bullet for it, thus freeing them both. The crew all awaken, and Jason addresses the Judgmite, or the Judger, or the Judgment Lady, or whatever you want to call her. He orders her out of Earth's orbit, but if you're a comic fan, you well know that this is priming her for a monologue. The Judgment Lady tells them that nobody had made a case for their existence. She tells them that as the first species to set out in search for intelligent species, they had been thoroughly disappointed. They were only met with fear, and she found it ironic that a ship powered by the confidence of one species was destroying planets full of fear just by its proximity. She asked them to leave as they were not worthy of being in the same room as such an enlightened and confident race as theirs. Jason demands to be heard and points out that 6 trillion lives were at risk. He tells her that more than fear, human lives are ruled by hope, that they are not destroyed by fear, but liberated by their hope. The Judgment Lady does not take it seriously and argues that she doesn't want to hear anything from someone who lives on a planet where war's still a way of life, and the rich look away while the poor starve. The group argues against her, calling her rude and flawed. Suddenly, a tremor runs through the ship. Gwen asks what it was. The Judgment Lady brushes her off and asks them to leave. Jason and Dane realize why she's so flustered, though. The ship literally ran on the confidence of her race. An argument of the humans had messed with her confidence. As another tremor passes through the ship, she kicks them all off the ship and heads home. Meanwhile, in Area 51, the Colonel sadly apologizes to humanity for sending a bunch of actors to save them. His sorrow does not last long, though, as the NSEA Protector returns, having completed its mission. A week later, the cast and crew of Galaxy Quest, The Journey Continues, gather at Jason's house to catch the premiere of the Backdoor pilot. Dane notices that Jason has no date, and Jason replies that he was trying to get his act together for someone to notice someday. He asks Guy to do the honors, and Guy picks up the remote. Flipping through the channels, unable to settle on any one of them, Gwen asks him to stop when he replies that Galaxy Quest was on every single channel. The people at the watch party celebrate, not knowing that it was a gift from Commander Mathesar, whose signal to pick up the show's transmission had overridden every single broadcast signal on Earth. This was a global warning, not as exciting as the original film, but the story managed to capture the voices of the characters perfectly. That is the only compliment I have for the series, unfortunately. The Thermians disguise themselves as human as not to scare the Earthlings with their octopus-like bodies. so them looking like humans on their ship, where there are no humans, is an illogical choice. Their art was not up to the mark and made no attempts to imitate the cast. In my opinion, the cast that included Tim Allen, Alan Rickman, Sigourney Weaver, Tony Shalhoub, and Sam Rockwell was the reason the film was such a hit. The characters, now having unrecognizable faces, threw me off. Thankfully, this is not the only sequel we got, as The Journey Continues was released in January of 2015. Let's take a look at them now.
Brandon, what does the Omega-13 device do?
The side effects of Omega-13. Across the galaxy, a planet called Dearth was ravaged by a civil war between a significantly advanced technocracy and those who rebelled against them. The technocracy had gained control of Kinwai, a city-state that had great spiritual significance to the Darthians. The primary defense there was the Ikara beam, a super weapon that made it impossible for the rebels to storm the Kinway. 4 of the rebels had done the impossible and snuck past the sight of the guards and entered the control station. They broke into the control station and with their guns subdued the guards. Once they gained access to the controls, they disrupted the targeting array of the Ikara beam, confident that nothing could go wrong and that they had secured a win for the rebels. Several light years away, just 13 seconds ago, SARS had invaded the NSEA protector and shot down the crew, prompting Jason to activate the Omega-13. Its effect of time reversal was not just applicable to the NSEA protector, but the entire universe. It reversed 13 seconds all over the universe, undoing the work of the rebels and warning the technocracy of the upcoming trouble. As soon as the rebels broke in, the guards hid and tagged Gur, the leader of the 4 rebels. He asked the rest of the rebels to save themselves as he succumbed to the Ikara beam. Skoon, another one of the rebels, is tagged as well, and the remaining 2 rebels book it out of the city. The 2 racked their brains as to what went wrong, as both of them had the memory of succeeding in the mission. They both conclude that whatever happened was not because of the technocracy, as they had been caught too off guard. Years later, Brandon, the superfan, had joined the California Center for Scientific Advancement in San Francisco and had extraterrestrial help for his assignment using the Thermian communicator. Their conversation eventually led to discussing the season finale of the new season of Galaxy Quest, when suddenly Brandon heard a knock. He opened the door and was shocked to see himself. The Drithian at the door revealed his true self, and seeing the portable communicator concluded that he was on the right planet to seek his revenge. He ordered Brandon to come with him and Adnar. The Thermian, talking to Brandon on the communicator, immediately responded by transporting him. A week later in SoCal Comic-Con, a teaser for the new season of Galaxy Quest is shown to a cheering audience. The cast is called in to answer some questions, and they respond with their usual media-trained wit. Unfortunately, Guy decides that the convention is the perfect time to talk about his spin-off, and that pisses off the rest of the cast. In the green room, Tommy tells Guy off for speaking about something that's not a done deal yet, and it would lead to unwanted gossip. Guy shifts the blame to Jason for speaking about the upcoming film. As the argument between the cast rise, Jason gets a ping on his phone from Brandon, asking him to meet him at the parking garage. As Jason enters the garage, Brandon first throws a rock at him, which confuses Jason. Not the welcome anybody expects. Brandon explains that he had to be sure Jason was not one of those shape-shifting lizard people. Jason's lost and demands an explanation. Brandon lays it all out. His continued communication with the Thermian and the lizard people who had tracked his communicator. Brandon explains that they wanted to take out anybody that threatened their plan to infiltrate Earth, and if Jason had been one of them, he would have been able to avoid the rock Brandon had thrown. Jason does not take it seriously and asks Brandon to take it easy on the Thermian's replicated coffee. Brandon is offended that Jason does not believe him and is sensing that he invites him home for a conversation with the Thermians about the lizard people. That night, Mathesar tells them that he has included the alien's visit in his report to Jason, which Jason had not checked as he received 2 calls that day from them. Mathesar adds that there was no need to worry and that these aliens were not sinister. The bell rings, interrupting their conversation, and Jason answers the door, hoping it's the pizza guy. What he sees is himself pointing a gun at him. Mathesar could not have been more wrong. Helping another race. The replica Jason puts out his reptilian tongue and flicks the real Jason's ear that makes him pass out. He wakes up in the alien spaceship with the rest of his crew. Dak the Drithian shows himself and blames Jason for not letting them end the civil war plaguing their planet. Dak tells him about their race, the Drithians, who had evolved their camouflage abilities to become the universe's sought-after actors, spies, saboteurs, and assassins. As their civilization grew, so did their conflicts, which eventually led to a civil war. The technocracy had created the Akara beam, a weapon that was placed above the city of Kanui on a satellite and which could kill anyone the technocracy tagged with their pinpoint accuracy. Jason doesn't see the problem with it and asks Dak and his people to keep out of the city to avoid the weapon. He tells them that many were killed because of Jason's use of Omega-13. If they didn't atone for it, Dak threatened to infiltrate Earth looking like them and committing atrocious crimes to ruin their lives. The thought of knowing that they didn't do anything wrong but being punished and humiliated for it shocks everyone but Fred, who takes it with his usual candor, pointing to La Lorari. Tommy tries to reason with them, and their previous win was just a fluke, and that they were not equipped to handle an alien civil war. Dak doesn't listen, though, and demands that they all head out with him and Drith. As they weren't coming willingly, Dak decides to use force and invites Jason to combat. Jason agrees and starts fighting, but it is clear from the very beginning that the actor cannot face Dak. Tommy and Guy begin humming the fight music from Season 2 to pump him up, but all it does is distract Jason. Jason lands on his ass the third time. Dak declares it settled and asks him to join him to Drith. Jason asks him to wait till the convention is over. Dak doesn't have that much patience. He tells him that the other Drithians will take their place in the convention and replace them, make sure that nobody notices their absence. Alexander Dane cannot bring himself to entrust his public image in the hands of an understudy, but he doesn't have much choice, does he? Brandon is the only one excited about the mission, as he wants to go back to space, and Guy asks to be let out, offering to guide the Drithians in the convention to make sure they don't do something to uproot the cast's popularity. Dak's ship was damaged on their way to Earth, and he asks for another ship, causing an outburst in Jason. Damn it, Dak! He's an actor, not a technician. Dak knows that, though, and asks him to talk to the excellent technicians he knows. Jason contacts Mathesar and visits New Thermia, where Mathesar has a present for Jason, Protector 3, made to imitate the ship used in the second season of Galaxy Quest. Alexander puts on the prosthetic, unable to get into character without the rubber headpiece, and the two bicker a bit about Alex's superstitions, but soon they set out to Drith, with Tommy whining about missing a reservation. Starting troubles. Jason records a captain's log as they reach planet Drith and hide behind a moon to avoid attracting attention. While ending the log, he accidentally presses the red alert button, causing a loud sound to echo all across the spaceship, just to let you know how well the mission's going. As the group stands at the digitizer with Fred, Laliari, and Brandon left behind, Fred hesitates to digitize them onto the planet. He admits that the inside-out pig that he digitized was still a major part of his nightmares. Jason assures him that nothing would go wrong and they'll all get digitized onto the planet. Unfortunately, something does go wrong. Jason and Gwen's heads swap bodies, causing considerable shock. Brandon has an idea, though, inspired by an episode, and he uses the digitizer to fix them. Meanwhile, back in California, Guy struggles to teach the Drithians what's normal as one of them stuffs a live mouse into his mouth. Gwen's imitator asks them all to listen to Guy as they need to blend in. A convention employee invites them all to the singing, and Jason's imitator accompanies her with the same brashness and charisma of Jason. In Drith, after walking through the hot desert for hours, Jason asks if they were there yet, and Dak replies that they were at least 30 bowls away from the city. Alex is annoyed that their translator doesn't translate time and distance. Their journey is stopped by a loud growl. Dak tells Tommy that it was the sound of an Arbu, a bipedal monster with a long tail and covered with hair. Jason shouts it against Dak's orders and manages to only anger the creature. Dak is pissed, as the Arbu would have left after eating one of them if they hadn't angered it. So Dak was fully committed to sacrificing one of them. Now that the only option to all of them was kill or be killed, they prepared to face the beast. Their guns seem to be useless against the Arbu, and Dak sneaks up behind the creature and drives a knife into its throat. The Arbu crashes to the ground and with its last breath lets out a vomit of fire. Tommy's hit by the fire and drops down. Gwen's confused, as only his hand was hurt, but Dak tells them the poison of the Arbu was invading his system, and they needed to leave him behind. The crew never leaves anyone behind, and he calls Fred to let him know. Brandon digitizes Tommy to the medical bay and digitizes himself onto the planet. Jason's not happy with Brandon's recklessness, as he is afraid that the young man would harm himself in the mission. Brandon reminds him that he is not just equestrian, but a young scientist, and shows him an operational weapon that works just like their laser pistols. Jason relents and lets him join them. Taking down the technocracy. On the outskirts of Kenway, the group meets Dak's friend Quint. Brandon had brought him with a device he had created with the Thermians that detected there was no toxicity in the sewers of Kenway, as they were to travel through them to attack the controls of the Ikara beam. Gwen and Alex ask if they could act their way through the mission, pretending to be off-world clients looking to buy Drithian technology. But Quint sarcastically asks them to bungle up their second chance to take over the Kenway by being easy targets. Alexander does not react well to the criticism, lunging at Quint to say that his King Lear made the Queen weep. Jason holds him back and asks them to follow Quint's lead. In the NSEA Protector 3, Fred watches Tommy in the healing pod and feels it's hopeless, wondering if he should have listened to his parents' advice and study medicine. Lalari confronts him, assuring him that the pod was working well and that if he was a doctor, they would not have met. Tommy wakes up in the pod and freaks out as he's submerged in liquid. Fred's knee-jerk reaction to that is to shoot him. And when Tommy catches his breath, Lalari tells him that the liquid was actually carrying air into his lungs and that there was no way he was going to drown. Out of the pod, Tommy notices they had a six-pack thanks to the medical water. Back on Earth, Guy is very close to a panic attack as the Drithian Alexander keeps slyly pinching the necks of people who were only there at the fan convention, ironically, causing them to pass out. Guy asks him to cut it out, reminding him that his job was to make sure nobody was suspicious of them and head on back home. The mission team reaches the control station, which is guarded by two Drithians. Quint explains that all of the guards in the city were armed with tagger pistols that would tag the genetic code of whoever they shot, and the Ikara beam would take care of the rest. When Quint explains that the beams would unmake its victims, Gwen smacks Jason for getting them all into this extraterrestrial trouble. Jason has a plan, though, and it begins with using Alexander and Gwen as distractions. The two perform a scene from King Lear, and when the guards ask them to identify themselves, Jason and Brandon attack them from behind with laser pistols. Inside, they are met with a giant android that is dismantled with one shot from the laser pistol. They run into the control room, and in their haste, Brandon doesn't notice the booby trap path that tags him. Instantly, the beam attacks him, but luckily for them, the beam doesn't affect humans. No longer fearful of getting tagged, the Earth team rushes on forward. Jason points the gun at the two guards in the control room, while Brandon triggers the self-destruct machine in the Ikara beam. He then has Lalari beam everyone in the control station up to the Protector. Moments later, the control station explodes, and the leader of the technocracy finds out that a teleportation signal was directed off-planet from the control station. They trace the signal to the NSEA Protector 3 and demand an explanation as to why they declared war on the planet. Jason gives the performance of his lifetime and tells him that he only rescued the people there after he noticed an impending explosion. Quint tells them that their debt has been repaid, and they head home, intending to forget everything that had happened. Unfortunately, 18 months later, Drithians of the technocracy catch up to Jason's lies and show up at his doorstep. The loss of the Ikara beam had shifted the balance of power, and the technological paradise that the technocracy had built has been now razed. You might think that the Drithians were there to demand revenge, but that's not the case. The technocracy sect had enough of Drith and wanted to move to a new planet. Jason tries to dissuade them that Earth's not what they were looking for, and the Drithians assure them that Earth was hardly the planet for them. They wanted to hire Jason to find a new home for them. With that, will he, won't he, the episode comes to an end. I definitely loved Galaxy Quest, The Journey Continues, way more than I did Global Warming. Written by Eric Burnham and illustrated by Nacho Aranz and Esther Sands. This comic series imitated the tone, humor, and atmosphere of the original film really well. The art was better, the plot was intriguing, and the action was not something to be dismissed either. The only real gripe I have, though, is the faces of Alexander, Guy, and Jason were at times so similar that I couldn't tell them apart in the story. Other than that, 4 stars. It's a must-read. While we wait for any news about the TV series, I recommend reading these comics once more. What did you think of the series? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like the video, you know what to do.